This is my ranking of games like Balatro that I've played, based purely on my personal experience. Each one is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how strong the roguelike deck building loop feels, how well the card synergies and builds come together, and how addictive the run-based strategy is. Let's get straight into the list. Gambonanza starts like normal chess, but after a few runs I realized the game was constantly changing the rules around me. Pieces still move in familiar ways, yet every match becomes more about adapting to strange modifiers, random upgrades, and brutal board effects. I liked how each run forced me into different strategies, instead of letting me repeat the same plan again and again. Some bosses blocked vision, others changed movement rules, and a few encounters became complete chaos after a single mistake. The smaller board also made every move feel risky because there was barely any room to recover after bad positioning. Even though some runs felt unfair due to bad randomness, I kept coming back to experiment with new combinations and strange builds. This lands in the good tier. Die in the dungeon looked simple at first, but after a few runs I started enjoying how much pressure the game puts on every decision. Instead of playing as heroes, I was controlling a monster crawling through dangerous rooms while fighting groups of fighters, rogues, clerics, and wizards. I liked how each monster had different powers because it made every run feel slightly different. The dice system also kept battles tense since one unlucky roll could completely change the fight. Some scenarios became frustrating due to strange balance issues, especially when random traps wasted turns or certain enemy combinations slowed everything down. Still, I had fun experimenting with builds, collecting upgrades, and pushing through difficult encounters to survive longer runs. This easily earns a place in the great tier. Monster Train 2 took everything I liked about the first game and expanded it with way more strategy, stronger builds, and crazier combinations during runs. I spent most battles trying to create overpowered setups with equipment cards, upgraded units, and room effects that completely changed how each floor worked. What kept me hooked was how every decision mattered, from choosing factions to managing energy and positioning units correctly before enemies reached the top floor. I also liked how the new clans played very differently because some focused on decay damage, others on gold generation, while a few became stronger through movement and spell combos. Even failed runs felt exciting since I was always unlocking new upgrades or discovering another ridiculous strategy to try next time. This easily rides straight into the masterpiece tier of my ranking. CloverPit instantly hooked me with its creepy gambling theme and the constant feeling that every spin could either save the run or destroy everything. I spent most of my time stacking multipliers, collecting strange charms, and trying to create absurd combinations that flooded the screen with ridiculous numbers. What I liked most was how the game constantly tempted me into taking bigger risks, even when I already had enough money to survive another deadline. The dark room, flashing slot machine, and aggressive sound effects made every jackpot feel exciting while every bad spin felt painful. After longer runs, the gameplay did start dragging because I was mostly watching giant numbers grow instead of making meaningful decisions. Still, experimenting with builds and chasing impossible payouts kept me returning for more attempts. This settles nicely into the good tier. Dicey Dungeons kept surprising me because every character completely changed how I approached battles and deck building. At first it looked simple, but after unlocking harder episodes I had to start thinking carefully about dice management, status effects, and which equipment worked best against certain enemies. I liked how the warrior, thief, witch, and inventor all felt completely different, instead of sharing the same playstyle with small changes. The art style also gave the game a lot of charm because even repeated enemies stayed fun to look at during long sessions. Some runs became frustrating when bad dice rolls ruined a strong setup, especially during difficult boss fights, but creating smart combinations that finally worked felt extremely satisfying afterward. Even after repeated losses, I always wanted to jump back in for another run. This is an excellent tier game. Peglin looked like a silly pachinko game at first, but after a few runs I realized how much strategy was hidden behind the chaos. I spent hours experimenting with different orb combinations, relics, bomb setups, and critical hit builds while trying to survive increasingly difficult bosses. What made the game so addictive was how every board could completely change the outcome of a fight depending on where the ball landed. Sometimes I would create ridiculous damage chains that destroyed enemies instantly, while other runs collapsed because a single shot bounced the wrong way. I also liked how each area introduced new mechanics like moving pegs, slippery slime boards, and strange enemy patterns that forced me to adapt constantly. Even failed runs stayed entertaining because the randomness always created unexpected moments. This absolutely deserves a spot in the excellent tier. Inscryption started as a creepy card game inside a dark cabin, but the deeper I went, the more the entire experience kept changing in ways I never expected. At first, I was managing sacrifices, bones, and strange creature abilities during tense battles. But later, the game constantly introduced new mechanics, puzzles, and twists that completely reshaped how I played. I loved how every boss fight felt unique, because some encounters changed the rules entirely and forced me to rethink my strategy on the spot. The unsettling atmosphere also made every run feel mysterious without relying on cheap horror tricks. Even outside the card battles, exploring the room and solving hidden puzzles added another layer that kept me curious the whole time. Very few games manage to stay this creative from beginning to end. This easily stands tall in the masterpiece tier. Slay the Spire completely took over my time once I started understanding how deep the card combinations and relic synergies could become during a run. Every decision mattered, from choosing which path to take to deciding whether I should grab another attack card or focus more on defense and scaling. I loved how each character completely changed the experience because poison builds, orb strategies, and heavy strength setups all required different ways of thinking. The relic system also kept runs exciting since a single item could completely transform how my deck worked. Even failed attempts stayed fun because I was always learning something useful for the next climb up the Spire. Boss fights became especially satisfying once my build finally started working exactly the way I planned. This belongs without question in the masterpiece tier. Aotenjo Infinite Hands felt like somebody merged Balatro with Mahjong and somehow made the combination work surprisingly well. At first I was confused by some of the tile mechanics, but after a few runs I started understanding how addictive the score building and combo stacking could become. I liked how every round pushed me into making difficult decisions about discards, sequences, triplets, and which artifacts could multiply my score into absurd numbers later in the run. Even though the game clearly takes inspiration from Balatro, it still feels different enough because building strong Mahjong hands requires more planning and careful setup. Some runs became frustrating when I kept drawing useless tiles at the worst possible moments, but finally completing a massive scoring hand always felt rewarding afterward. This earns a solid place in the great tier. Dungeons and Degenerate gamblers somehow turned blackjack into a chaotic roguelike that kept me completely addicted during long runs. At first, I thought it would just be normal card gambling with small twists, but the game quickly became full of absurd combinations, strange effects, and ridiculous strategies that constantly changed how I played. I loved building decks around healing, shield generation, busted score manipulation, and cards that completely broke the normal blackjack rules. Some opponents also forced me to rethink my strategy because certain bosses had dangerous gimmicks that could instantly ruin weak builds. The randomness occasionally became frustrating when I could not find the exact cards needed later in a run, but discovering overpowered synergies always made up for it afterward. This easily slides into the excellent tier on my ranking. Be A Landlord turned a simple slot machine into something far deeper than I expected once the synergies and strategy systems started opening up. At first, I was just grabbing random symbols to survive rent payments, but later I was creating builds around animals, miners, fruits, thieves, and ridiculous combinations that flooded the screen with money. I liked how every spin forced me to think carefully about whether adding another symbol would strengthen my setup or completely ruin my odds of triggering useful combos. The game also stayed entertaining because some late-game interactions became hilariously overpowered once the right items started stacking together. Even though luck plays a huge role, most losses still felt connected to bad planning instead of unfair randomness. This easily cashes out into the excellent tier. That's my ranking of games like Balatro. Let me know which games gave you those one more run moments the hardest. Thanks for watching.